The affidavit of support is one of the more confusing parts of the adjustment of status process. Whether you're filing a family petition through a spouse or parent or child, the affidavit of support is a requirement. And one of the most frequent questions I receive is whether the petitioner, which is also going to be the financial sponsor, meets the income requirements on the affidavit of support. What I have in front of me is a printout from the USCIS website. You can get to this yourself by just Googling I-864P. So I-864 is the affidavit of support, and there's a website that lists the requirements under the poverty guidelines. So just Google I-864P, and the first link that pops up on Google is gonna bring you to what I'm looking at a printout of. And when you get to this website, you generally wanna click for the contiguous 48 states, unless you don't live in the contiguous 48 states. There are different requirements for like Hawaii and Alaska. And then when you click on this link, you'll see there's 3 columns in the chart. The first column is the sponsor's household size. The second column is 100% of the HHS poverty guidelines. And the third column is 125% of the poverty guidelines. For the majority of people, you're gonna be looking at the 125% of poverty guidelines column. The only exception is if the petitioner is in the armed forces, active military right now. If they are, the income requirements are slightly lower. They just need to prove that they make 100% of the poverty guidelines. This chart is what I look at when I'm determining whether the sponsor, which is going to be the petitioner, and I'll give you an example, meets the income requirements. So I ask a couple questions. So how do we determine the petitioner's household size? Let me start by giving you guys an example. Let's say a US citizen is petitioning for his spouse. So that US citizen in this case would be considered the petitioner and the financial sponsor. If that petitioner has children, those would be added to the household size. If that petitioner has ever sponsored other immigrants before, let's say he petitioned for his parents and one of those parents is now in the US and they recently entered and they are still a permanent resident, that would also be added to his household size. So in this instance, we look at the petitioner. Let's say he's married because he's petitioning for his spouse, and he has 1 child, and he petitioned for another immigrant before his parent. So in this instance, the household size would be calculated at a 4. We go to the sponsor's household size section, look at 4, go over to 125% of the poverty guidelines. We need to show that this petitioning sponsor earns $40,187. So how do we know if he's making that? You might think, oh, we just look at his W-2. Actually, no, that's not what you would look at. You would look at the most recent tax return. On the form 1040, which is the federal tax return form, you're gonna look for the total income line. I believe it's line 9 on the 2024 version of the 1040. So on line 9, it'll say total income in bold, and then the number that's there would need to be higher than $40,187. There's a couple things you're gonna be looking at when you're determining the sponsor's household size. Is the sponsor married? Does the sponsor have children under the age of 21, even if they don't live with the sponsor? Has the sponsor ever petitioned for other people before? Does the sponsor have any other dependents on the tax return? These are the factors we look at. If the answers to any of these are yes, you're gonna be increasing the household size. There's also some confusion when it comes to filling out the actual I-864 form. There's a chart on one of the pages where they do the calculation for what your household size is. It'll start by saying these are the total number of people you're petitioning. And let's say you're just petitioning and sponsoring for your spouse. So 1 will already be in that field. It'll already say 1 there. And the instructions of the form say do not repeat any person more than once. So the next question will be, are you married? And for that, you're gonna put 0, because even though you're married, you already indicated 1 on that petition for the number of people you're sponsoring. So just be careful when you do this, not to repeat any household members to artificially increase your household size, because if you do that, you're gonna have a higher income requirement. Even though these requirements are pretty low for most people, it can still be a problem. I see it frequently as a problem for business owners who don't report a lot of income, or people who just changed jobs or who were sick or disabled for a lot of last year. In those instances, if you don't meet the requirements, you're gonna need a joint financial sponsor. I actually see this a lot for US citizen children who are over the age of 21 and in college who are petitioning for their parents. They're in college, they're not really making a lot of money or no money at all, and they still want to be able to petition for their parents. In that instance, they will need a financial joint sponsor. This financial joint sponsor can be any person. They don't need to be related to you, but they do need to be a permanent resident or a US citizen. And they will need to provide their tax returns for at least the most recent tax year, and they will need to sign the Affidavit of Support. In those instances, all you need to do is prove that either you meet the financial requirements or the joint financial sponsor meets the requirements. It's just a checkbox on the government's checklist to make sure the intending immigrant meets the Affidavit of Support requirements. Doesn't matter if you meet the requirements by $1 or $1 million. Having more income isn't gonna make it easier. Another question I regularly receive is, can I use my assets to meet these requirements? The answer is yes. But generally speaking, it confuses USCIS officers when you try to do the asset calculation. You need to prove that your assets are readily convertible into cash, and that can be difficult if you have real property, because you'll need a very recent appraisal, and it just adds a lot of complication. 99% of the time, it's easier to just find a joint financial sponsor. It reduces the headaches, and even when we do it properly with assets, 30% of the time, USCIS issues a request for evidence, which ends up slowing down the immigration process, even if we are able to satisfy them. Just a pro tip, if you get that request for evidence, you really need to speak with an attorney. And if you want to do it yourself and you're trying to prove that the person meets the assets requirements, not based on income, you just want to do it based on assets, at that point, once you receive a request for evidence, I would change strategy and get someone who meets enough of the income requirements, because if you don't 100% satisfy that Affidavit of Support, or the immigration officer gets your response and they're still not sure you meet the requirements, your application is going to get denied. And if your application gets denied now under the Trump administration, there's a very high probability that the next thing that's going to happen is the immigrant is going to be placed into removal proceedings, and a notice to appear in immigration court to begin deportation will be initiated. One final point here, because I realized that I didn't clearly state this throughout the video. If you meet the income requirements, so in that example I gave, if the petitioning sponsor shows $40,187 on his most recent tax return, which now that it's after April 14th should be the 2024 tax return, you don't need to submit any evidence of assets. You also don't need to submit your second and third year tax returns. On the I-864, it offers 3 spaces to offer tax return numbers for the most recent tax year, second most recent tax year, and third most recent tax year. You don't have to fill out the second and third tax year spaces. You only have to fill out the space for the most recent tax year. The other 2 are entirely optional, and I never submit them because it's never really made a difference historically. All right, guys, I hope this video helped somebody understand a little bit more about the Affidavit of Support. If you're interested in learning more about family-based immigration, you should subscribe to my channel. If you yourself need any assistance with any family-based immigration and you're looking to consult with a lawyer or hire a lawyer to assist you with the process, you can find my information in the video description below, and I'll see you guys next time for another video.